By 216 BC, Rome had already suffered two catastrophic defeats. Most nations would have sued for peace. Rome did not. Instead, it assembled the largest army in the history of the Roman Republic and marched south to destroy one man. His name was Hannibal Barca. What happened next would become one of the greatest battlefield victories in military history. More than 2,000 years later, military academies around the world still study what happened on a dusty plain near the small Italian town of Cannae. But surprisingly, it wasn't simply because Hannibal won, it was because how he won changed warfare forever. On August 2nd, 216 BC, nearly 130,000 soldiers stood facing one another near the town of Cannae in southeastern Italy. On one side stood the Roman Republic, determined to finally crush Hannibal after years of humiliation. Opposing them was a Carthaginian army that was significantly smaller, composed not of one unified people, but of Africans, Iberians, Celts, Numidians, and other allied warriors serving under a single commander. By every conventional measure, Rome should have won. The Romans fielded perhaps 80 to 90,000 men, the largest army that had ever assembled. Hannibal commanded roughly half that number. Yet before the day was over, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers lay dead, and one of the greatest military disasters in Roman history had unfolded. Most history books remember Cannae simply as Hannibal's greatest victory. But the truly remarkable story isn't just the scale of the defeat, it's that Hannibal accomplished something no commander had ever successfully achieved before. He deliberately lured a much larger army into destroying itself. Following their crushing defeats at the Trebia River and Lake Trasimene, Rome had reached a breaking point. Panic spread throughout the Republic as entire Roman armies had been wiped out in successive campaigns. Determined to end Hannibal's invasion once and for all, the Senate authorized the largest military force Rome had ever placed in the field. Hannibal understood something his opponents did not. He knew he could never defeat Rome in a prolonged war of attrition. Rome could simply raise another army, and another, and another. If Carthage was going to win, Hannibal needed something far greater than another battlefield victory. He needed a victory so catastrophic that Rome's Italian allies would abandon the Republic altogether. To force that decisive confrontation, Hannibal seized the Roman supply depot at Cannae. It wasn't merely a symbolic target, it stored grain and provisions vital to the Roman army. Once it fell into Carthaginian hands, the Romans had little choice but to march south and fight on ground Hannibal had effectively chosen for them. The Roman commanders believed they were finally trapping Hannibal. In reality, Hannibal had spent the entire campaign setting a trap for Rome. As the Roman army advanced, everything appeared to be unfolding exactly as the consuls had planned. Rome's greatest strength had always been in its heavy infantry. Packed tightly together, tens of thousands of legionnaires drove relentlessly into Hannibal's center, believing sheer weight and discipline would finally shatter their Carthaginian line. And at first, it seemed to work. Hannibal's center slowly began to give ground. The Carthaginian line bent backward under the enormous Roman pressure. To the Romans, victory seemed only moments away. But what they didn't realize was that Hannibal wanted them to keep advancing. His center wasn't collapsing. It was retreating exactly as planned. Hannibal had deliberately placed many of his less experienced Spanish and Gallic infantry in the center of his line while positioning his battle-hardened African infantry on both flanks. As the Romans pushed deeper and deeper into what appeared to be a breakthrough, they unknowingly marched into the center of Hannibal's trap. Then everything changed. The African infantry pivoted inward from both sides. At almost the same moment, Hannibal's cavalry, having defeated the Roman horsemen on the flanks, swept behind the Roman army and attacked from the rear. In only a matter of minutes, the Roman army found itself surrounded. Front, both flanks, and rear. For perhaps the first time in military history, an entire field army had been caught in a deliberate double envelopment. There was nowhere left to run. What followed was less a battle than a slaughter. Ancient sources suggest that somewhere between 50 and 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day, making Cannae one of the bloodiest defeats the Roman Republic would ever suffer. Modern historians generally estimate somewhat lower numbers, but regardless of the exact total, the scale of the disaster remains staggering. Rome had lost senators, veteran officers, thousands of experienced legionnaires. An army that had taken years to build had ceased to exist. And yet, this is where the forgotten story truly begins. Because despite suffering one of the worst military defeats in its history, Rome refused to surrender. Many of Hannibal's allies believed that Cannae would force the Roman Republic to negotiate for peace. Hannibal himself hoped the devastating defeat would convince Rome's Italian allies to abandon the Republic, leaving Rome politically isolated and unable to continue the war. Instead, Rome did something few ancient states ever managed after such a catastrophe. It simply raised another army, then another, and eventually Rome wore Hannibal down through sheer endurance. Military historians often describe Cannae as Hannibal's greatest victory, and they are right. But perhaps his greatest legacy isn't that Hannibal won, it's that commanders have spent more than 2,000 years trying to understand how he won. From Frederick the Great to Napoleon Bonaparte, from Alfred von Schlieffen to Norman Schwarzkopf, of military leaders have studied the Battle of Cannae, searching for ways to replicate Hannibal's masterpiece on their own battlefields. The battle remains a fixture in military education because of Hannibal's extraordinary use of terrain, deception, combined arms, and the double envelopment maneuver. But perhaps the greatest lesson isn't that tactics alone. It's about leadership. Hannibal looked at an opponent who outnumbered him nearly 2-1. And instead of fighting the battle Rome expected, he created an entirely different one. That ability to think differently, to turn an enemy's greatest strength into its greatest weakness, is why Cannae continues to be studied more than 22 centuries later. I'm Michael Stroud, and remember, history matters because people matter. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it if you would like this video, subscribe to History with Michael Stroud, share it with someone who enjoys history, and leave a comment below. Every like, comment, and share helps more people discover the channel and allows me to continue bringing these stories to life. I release new history documentaries every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so be sure to click the notifications bell so you never miss a new episode. For more historical articles, speaking information, and my latest research, please visit michaelgstroud.com. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.